Howdy folks, hope you're all having a good weekend, and welcome back to Jurassic World Evolution 2. So, there has been an update. There's some DLC, which you have to pay for, but it isn't expensive. The Cretaceous Era Pack, or Late Cretaceous Era Pack, I'm not sure. Some new dinosaurs, some new stuff, but as well as that, there's a bunch of free stuff. Including, but not limited to, the ability to play on basically any map that you like in sandbox mode. Including all of the maps that were in the admittedly fairly mediocre single-player campaign story, including this, the Pennsylvania map. That's right, Akazuki. Yes, it is the only autumn map in the game. So there are some colour variations here that you won't find on any other map. Akazuki, I'm getting to that. Honestly, she's just got no patience whatsoever. Must be a cat thing. Anyway, so I've started a new sandbox mode here on the Pennsylvania map, right next to the airport. And I'm throwing down, well, it's not really going to be a park. There's an experiment that I wanted to conduct. So there's basically going to be a bunch of facilities, one enclosure, and I'm going to test out the aggression of those velociraptors. I don't know if you recall in previous videos, but I was constantly complaining about how the raptors just kept fighting each other. And it was running up, well, as well as being expensive in vet bills, it was a pain in the arse in micromanaging the injured raptors back and forth between their enclosure and the paleomedical facility. Well, it turns out that they are actually fighting for a reason, and it's not just because they're raptors. It's all based on a couple of their ratings, attack and defense, which, when added together with no other modifiers in play, determines their dominance rating. The thing is, there are other genetic factors that come into effect, which don't directly affect the attack and defense rating, but can affect the dominance rating, which means that simply adding the attack and the defense rating together is no guarantee of having the most dominant dinosaur within a pack, and therefore the alpha in a pack. It's not unusual to have an extremely dominant creature that isn't the toughest creature within its species group. And that causes problems. So we're going to put this to the test today. So, first part of the experiment, we're going to tinker with this raptor's genome. Well, this clutch of raptors' genomes, in order to make them as strong as I can without being particularly intolerant. So strength obviously affects their combat rating, and their combat rating forms their base dominance level. So we're going to assign some scientists to that particular clutch of raptor eggs, and then we'll go to a next hatchery bay, and we're going to synthesize a new clutch of raptors with different genetic tinkering. For a start, I don't want them to be particularly strong. So that's obviously going to affect their base dominance, because strength, along with defense, are the two ratings that form the base dominance. But there are other things that influence the dominance as well. Sociability, for example. If you produce a dinosaur with the social trait, that also gives them, I think, 15% bonus dominance, without increasing their combat stats. There's another trait that you can't breed for, aggression. That simply has a chance of manifesting every time you incubate some eggs. And aggression not only increases their dominance, but also increases the strength. So an aggressive trait is fantastic if you're trying to create a natural alpha for whichever pack of dinosaurs you're synthesizing. Unfortunately, you can't breed for that. You just have to take the luck of the draw. But if you can get a dinosaur that's managed to manifest the social trait and the aggressive trait, as well as having high attack and defense and being strong, there's an excellent chance that it's going to have off-the-charts dominance, as well as the combat rating to back it up in the event of a challenge to its alpha status. So let's take a look at the first batch of eggs that are just about ready to synthesize right now. Going to check out which traits have manifested, then pick which of these eggs we want to incubate. Okay, so straight away the first one, good news, we got the aggressive trait. So that's an extra 15% dominance, but it's just the aggressive trait by itself, nothing else. So let's check the second egg. Same again, it's only the aggressive trait that's affecting its dominance, but with egg number 3 we have 3 separate traits that give bonuses to dominance. We have strong, social, and aggressive. The 4th egg has strong and social, but not aggressive, which means this one should be the dominant raptor from this particular clutch. Now, it's not the only raptor in this clutch with the strong trait. This one also has the strong trait, but it doesn't have the aggressive trait that raptor number 3 does. So while they should have the same combat rating, raptor number 3 should have the highest dominance. And if it comes out of the gate as the alpha, the theory is it will never face a challenge to its alpha status because it has the highest dominance. The theory is that a dinosaur with lower dominance will never challenge a dinosaur with higher dominance for leadership. Here's the second clutch that we synthesized. Deliberately low on combat stats, although they have all manifested the social trait, which does give them an extra 15% base dominance. But it's 15% base dominance over a lower starting dominance because none of these are particularly strong or durable. That's the way we engineered them. So we're going to throw these into the mix as well and see what happens. Okay, both batches of raptors are ready to go, but before I release them, I'm going to save the game here because I want to see what happens in order to prove the theory correct if I release each separate batch of raptors in a different order. Because that should, in theory, make a difference to how much blood gets spilled until they all work out exactly who's boss. So, here we go. Actually, I should probably, put some water and feeders and stuff down. So I'll go ahead and get that taken care of, and we'll come back when it's done. Right, that's taken care of. They shouldn't all starve and die of thirst immediately, so very nice skin pattern, I have to say. Right. So, we're going to check out not just the dominance rating, because that's effectively how they talk the talk, which determines who's going to fight for dominance, but their actual attack and defense ratings. Whether or not they can walk the walk as well as talk the talk determines who's actually going to win the fights for dominance. Or, well, that's the theory at least. So here's Raptor 1. Let's check her out. 72 base dominance, 45 attack, 18 defense. Now, with no other traits being present, the dominance should be the sum of the attack and the defense, and it clearly isn't. But this raptor is from the less aggressive clutch. They have a 15% bonus to dominance from the social trait, but that's it. These raptors, basically, they talk the talk, but they don't really walk the walk. And that, theoretically, should be the source of your constant infighting amongst your raptor population. Raptors like these think that they walk the walk because of the buff that they've received to their dominance from the social stat, but they can't really back it up because their base combat rating is distinctly average. And if you have a raptor that is not the alpha, but it has higher dominance than the raptor, it's constantly going to be challenging the alpha for leadership and constantly losing because its combat stats, the attack and defense, are just not particularly good. All of these raptors have a dominance of 72, which is the sum of their attack and defense plus the 15% bonus from sociability. These ones have already decided amongst themselves which one's the alpha. It's raptor number 3. And they shouldn't challenge for alpha status because they all have the same dominance. Now we're going to introduce the most dominant raptor from the second clutch into the mix and see what happens. Now this is the raptor that had the aggressive, social and strong traits. So it has a way higher dominance, but it's also got a higher attack and defense rating. So I'm expecting this one to immediately challenge the current alpha for dominance, because it has a higher dominance rating, a much higher dominance rating. It's not going to be happy with the status quo. And it should win because it has higher attack and defense rating. At that point, in theory, it will never suffer a challenge to its leadership because it's the alpha and it has the highest dominance. And sure enough, within less than a minute, it immediately picked a fight with the current alpha. And it should win this fight because it's got better attack rating. Put this theory to the test. So which one's going to back off first? Yep. The former alpha is running with its tail between its legs. And Velociraptor 4 here is now the alpha. Now if the theory's correct, that should be the last fight that ever breaks out between these raptors. The raptor with the highest dominance is now the alpha of this pack. None of the other raptors should challenge it, even if they had higher attack or defense ratings. Because the current alpha is the one in the enclosure with the highest dominance, none of them should challenge it for leadership. This, in theory, should now be a stable Velociraptor pack with no leadership issues and no further fights breaking out between them. And in fact, that is exactly what happened. Now, to confirm the theory, I'm going to go back to that original save and start messing around with different traits and genetics and see what happens if we mix things up a little bit. So again, I've synthesized 2 new clutches of raptor eggs. This first clutch only really have artificial bonuses to their dominance, things like sociability. I was lucky enough to get some aggressive traits as well. None of these actually increase their combat rating, so this bunch of raptors should talk the talk but not walk the walk. This second batch of raptors, however, as you can see, have mostly inherited the defensive trait. These ones have been bred to fight. These ones are going to walk the walk. Defensive gives them a 20% dominant bonus. This one also has social for a further 15%. This one has aggressive for 15% as well as defensive for 20%, and this one also defensive and social. So it's difficult to say exactly which one of these is going to end up being in charge. But I guess there's only one way of finding out. So I've picked the one that's going to have the highest combat rating from the second clutch, which does not necessarily mean it's going to have the highest dominance rating. Because it's the only one that we've released into the enclosure, it's automatically going to be the alpha. But then we're going to release a bunch of raptors from the first clutch, the ones that all talk the talk but don't necessarily walk the walk, and we'll see what happens. I've bred them with different skin patterns, obviously, so we can tell the difference. Right then, so let's check these guys out. Well, straight away something's happened. This one is the new alpha. So why is that? Let's take a look at its stats. So it has a dominance of 72, but its attack and defense are bog standard. They're only 45 and 18. So with Raptor 1, he actually has... oh, that's peculiar. He's also apparently the alpha, but he definitely has the highest dominance. What I was expecting to happen was that since he was released first and already had the highest dominance, if none of the other raptors have higher dominance, they will never challenge him. Well, challenge her. I mean, they're all female. Oh, that's interesting. Raptor 2 no longer thinks that she's an alpha, which confirms what I was expecting to happen. If you release a bunch of raptors into an enclosure that has an existing raptor alpha, they will not challenge the existing alpha if that alpha has a higher dominance stat. The attack and defense ratings don't matter. Well, they do matter. They matter for determining who's going to win a fight, but the fight won't happen if the existing alpha already has the higher dominance. So what can we do to throw a spanner into the works? How about we try to introduce a raptor that has an even higher dominance but doesn't have higher attack and defense rating? If the theory's correct, they should constantly be fighting for dominance and constantly losing. Let's give that a try. So this time I've incubated a whole bunch of raptors that are basically all mouth and no trousers. Again, I've given them a different skin pattern in order to be able to differentiate them. I was careful not to manifest any actual traits that would give them a direct buff to their combat abilities, although I did, well, for example here, in order to achieve a dominance rating of 93 as well as the social and aggressive traits, I did have to give this one a slight boost to its defense rating without actually manifesting the defensive trait, which would have given a further 20% bonus to dominance. So this raptor here, number 7, has a higher dominance rating than raptor number 1. Raptor number 1 is the current alpha, but it does have better combat stats. So what should happen now is Raptor 7, and I haven't actually checked the other raptors, but, well, let's see, Raptor 6. Oh, Yeah, also. Very high dominance, but it actually has the same combat stats, 45 and 23, as Raptor 1, the current alpha. So if those two fight, it should be a 50-50 toss-up which one wins. But if this one wins, it should retain dominance. And that, by the way, isn't Raptors fighting, that's Raptors socialising. But yeah, if number 6 here, which has the same combat stats as Raptor 1, the current alpha, challenges Raptor 1 and wins, although there's an equal chance that it may lose, if it wins, it should become, well, it will become the new alpha because it won, but it should suffer no further challenges to its leadership because it's the Raptor with the current highest dominant rating of 93. If it challenges Raptor 1 and loses, and they have the same combat stats, so the fight could go either way, it will continue to challenge Raptor 1 until it wins, because it has the highest dominance. At that point, we have a stable pack with an alpha with no threats to its leadership. Also, bear in mind, I mean, I'm focusing on Raptor 6 here because she has the same combat stats as the current alpha. But I think at least 2 of these other new Raptors, while they don't have higher combat stats than the current alpha, they do have higher dominance than the current alpha. So the other Raptors are going to be challenging for leadership as well. Raptor 7, higher dominance, lower combat stats. Raptor 7 talks the talk, but it does not walk the walk, not compared to Raptor 1. Raptor 1 will beat it in a fight every time. But because Raptor 7 has higher dominance, it's constantly going to be challenging Raptor 1's authority. 6, with equal combat stats and higher dominance, is the only one that theoretically stands a chance of winning. And until 6 becomes the alpha, all of these Raptors are constantly going to be challenging number 1 for the position. Before we let things reach their natural conclusion, however, or at least what I'm theorising is going to be their natural conclusion, because 6 is the only one that actually stands a chance of beating 1 in a fair fight, I'm going to remove 6 from the equation just for the moment. So we're going to track her, I'm going to build an extension to this enclosure, and we'll put her in there by herself, away from number 1, well, not with herself, we'll put another Raptor or 2 in there so she doesn't get lonely. And then we'll see what happens to all of the other Raptors in this enclosure who have a higher dominance than 1, but don't stand a chance of taking 1 in a fight. Sure enough, Raptor 1 was constantly having to show the others who was boss. And she was constantly winning, because she had the better combat ratings. But it never stuck, because she had lower dominance. So this is the reason why I was constantly having fights between my Raptors. The Alpha didn't have the highest dominance rating, but it had the highest combat stats. So it's constantly having to see off challenges to its authority, which it can do with ease, because it's got the best combat stats. But the lesson never took hold, because it had lower dominance. A Raptor with higher dominance will always challenge an Alpha with lower dominance, regardless of whether or not it stands a chance of actually winning the fight. Like number 3 here, who has lost her 3rd fight in a row to number 1, but will not stop until one of them are dead. And let's face it, with this kind of record, it's probably going to be her, because she has 2 more dominance than Raptor number 1. The only way things are going to settle down here is if 6 fights and wins, at which point there will be no further challenges, because the Alpha will be the one with the highest dominance. Unfortunately, now I'm not saying that 6 didn't try. She's definitely trying, but she just didn't seem to have luck on her side. I mean, these 2 Raptors both have exactly the same combat ratings, but one just kept on winning, and I mean a lot. I mean, he was always going to win against the other Raptors, because they might have had higher dominance, but they didn't have hers combat ratings. 6 was the only one that actually stood a chance of beating her, and yet she never did. 1's still the boss, and has now won 5 fights in a row. Actually, she ended up winning a lot more than 5 before I had to start taking matters into my own hands in order to get some peace around here. Raptor 1, who I eventually named Ringo, was sending a steady stream of injured Raptors to the Paleo Medical Facility for quite a few hours, In fact, at one point, when she was running a KO rating of 7-0, she got sick and tired of just sending them to the medical bay. And she sent number 4, who frankly had it coming, to the coroner.
When a dinosaur dies, I feel like I've lost one of my own.
Eventually, by the time Ringo was winning her 10th fight against John, Paul and George, I got so sick and tired of waiting for Paul to successfully challenge and win in order for things to start settling down around here that I decided that the only way to do it was to ensure that Ringo had nobody but Paul to fight. So I started making plans to remove all of the other Raptors other than Ringo and Paul. And eventually, since they had the same combat stats, the law of averages stated that Paul was at some point going to beat her. At which point, since he had the higher dominance, he would become the new alpha and everything would settle down at last. And I'm sure that that would have worked. But matters got taken out of my hands, because Ringo wasn't done with her tricks. The second I turned my back on her while putting this plan into action, she went and jumped to the fence. And that was what made the difference. Now, she's still the alpha in an enclosure of 1, because she's the only raptor outside the fence. Inside the fence, however, we need a new alpha, and because Paul is the raptor inside the fence with the highest dominance, she assumes that position without having to fight for it. So what's going to happen when I've tranquilized Ringo and I reintroduce her to the raptor pack inside the fence? Well, pretty much as expected, she's back in her old stomping grounds, but she's no longer the alpha, because she doesn't have the highest dominance. She's not going to challenge for the position of alpha, even though she stands a pretty good chance of winning if she did, because she doesn't have the highest dominance. Paul is now the boss of her, and he's not above making sure that she knows it. Yeah, that's right. What do you think you're looking at? And there's Paul, right next to Ringo. Paul is the new alpha, and Ringo knows her place. So I guess the theory was confirmed. If you're constantly having problems with your raptors attacking each other for what appears to be no apparent reason, there is actually a very simple reason. It's because the raptor who is the current alpha of your pack doesn't have the highest dominance. And until the raptor who is the alpha of your pack is also the raptor with the highest dominance, they will constantly be fighting off challenges to their authority and constantly sending a steady stream of challenges to the paleo medical facility or the cemetery. Once your raptors know who is boss, they're perfectly well behaved. Well, as perfectly well behaved as raptors can ever be. They're probably still going to be constantly terrorizing your rangers, but they're not going to fight each other. Anyway, I think that's about it for today. Although we can give you a quick teaser of what you can expect in the next video. Apparently, raptors quite like the Indominus Rex. Problem is, the Indominus Rex doesn't like anybody.